Claude Cowork just hit 80.9% on SWE Bench verified, while OpenClaw costs you $0 to self-host. That gap could save or cost you hundreds a month depending on which one you pick. Desktop agents are exploding right now, so I'm running OpenClaw versus Claude Cowork through 5 head-to-head tests to see who actually wins. The cost winner is obvious, but the tool that actually fits your workflow depends on one thing you probably haven't thought about yet. My name is Brian, and I'm in these tools 12 hours a day, so you don't have to be. And every number here traces back to pricing pages, model cards, and community benchmarks both companies actually stand behind. If you're running 5 or more automations a week, picking the wrong agent can burn real money fast. Test 1. Cost. The scenario I kept coming back to. You're running OpenClaw on a premium model and you forget to turn it off overnight, and community reports say idle usage on a premium model can burn roughly $5 a day, which is $150 a month just sitting there doing nothing. So cost predictability matters a lot more than people think before they sign up. Okay, so I looked at 3 cost angles: entry price, mid-tier monthly, and predictability. OpenClaw's software is MIT licensed and free, so entry level it scores a 9 out of 10. But Claude Cowork's Pro plan is $20 a month, and that's actually cheaper than OpenClaw Cloud at $39 to $49 a month, which surprised me. And on predictability, OpenClaw scores a 4 because that variable model billing is genuinely hard to control. OpenClaw takes cost, and I'll be straight with you. The variable billing made me think it might lose this one, but free software is free software, and that entry-level advantage is just too big to ignore. So even though the mid-tier and predictability subtests go to Claude Cowork, OpenClaw goes up 1-0 on the scoreboard. Test 2. Coding benchmark performance. Picture a solo dev shipping a pull request on a Friday afternoon. The agent gets it wrong, and now the bug is in prod over the weekend, because the difference between a 73% pass rate and an 80% pass rate on real software engineering tasks is not small, and that's roughly 1 extra failure in every 14 tasks, which compounds fast at scale. What surprised me is how the numbers actually break down. Claude Code with Opus 4.5 hit 80.9% on SWE Bench verified, which is the first time any system broke 80% on that test, and OpenClaw's best adapter hits 73.4% on its own. Claw SWE Bench with a GLM 5.1 backbone, though those are different benchmarks, so a side-by-side comparisons is a bit apples to oranges, but the gap on the same scale test is real. Now this one's genuinely contested, and I want to be upfront about that. OpenClaw's PinchBench actually ranks Claude's own models as the best agent brains at 93.5%, which means when OpenClaw runs on Claude, you're kind of getting the same engine anyway. So the benchmark gap is real, but it's partly a harness versus model question, not just a product versus product question. Claude Cowork takes coding benchmark performance because the only verified 80% plus SWE bench score belongs to Claude Code with Opus 4.5, and that's the engine powering Cowork. And OpenClaw's flexibility is genuinely impressive, but on raw coding accuracy, the data just doesn't close that gap. So that ties it up at 1 apiece. Test 3. Speed. Here's a real number worth paying attention to. Community reports show OpenClaw response times ranging from 2 seconds all the way up to 23 seconds on the same task depending on your VPS and model choice. And if you're running a live workflow where a 20-second lag breaks the chain, that variance alone could be a deal breaker before you even look at the other tool. So I hit a wall on this one. I looked hard for Claude Cowork latency numbers, and I couldn't find a published figure anywhere, while OpenClaw has community-reported data showing typical responses from 2 to 15 seconds, and after optimization, you can cut that from 23 seconds down to 4 seconds, but without any comparable number. From Claude Cowork, there's no honest way to call a winner here. And look, this gap in the data matters. OpenClaw's speed is highly dependent on your own infrastructure choices, so the 2 to 15 second range is more of a you built it this way result than a fixed product spec. And Claude Cowork probably has consistent managed latency, but without a number, I can't confirm that. So this one stays unverified, and the comparison just isn't fair to make. Speed is a tie, and not the fun kind. Claude Cowork has no published latency figure to compare against, so no winner here, and the score stays 1-1 with one tied. Alright, so context window and deployment are still ahead, and those two tests are where the real decision lives for most of you. Because if you're a knowledge worker running long documents through an agent, the context test alone could flip everything you just heard about cost, and the deployment test decides whether you even have a choice, so stick around. Test 4, Context and Output Limits. 1 million tokens, that's the number, and if you're feeding a full codebase or a 500-page document into an agent and it hits a context wall halfway through, the task just fails and you start over. So at 200k tokens, you're already at the edge for big projects, and whether a tool can push to 1M on demand is a genuinely different capability class. What I found here is pretty clear. Both tools hit 200k tokens on standard context when running Claude models, so that part is even. But Claude Cowork's Pro plan goes up to 1M tokens, and that's community reported, so take it with a grain of salt, while OpenClaw has no published extended context figure, meaning you're capped at whatever model you plug in. Now the nuance here is that OpenClaw's context is flexible by design. If you swap in a model that supports 1M tokens natively, you get that window. So the gap isn't necessarily permanent, it just requires you to know which model to pick and how to configure it. And for non-developers, that's a real barrier. But for a developer who knows their stack, it's kind of a non-issue. Claude Cowork takes context and output limits because a guaranteed 1M token window out of the box is a real differentiator even if OpenClaw can theoretically match it with the right model, and the out-of-the-box gap is just too wide for most users to bridge easily, which puts Claude Cowork ahead, 2-1 with one tied. Test 5, Deployment and Modality. An objection I hear a lot is that both tools do autonomous work, so what's really different? And the answer is, everything about how you set them up and who can actually use them, because one requires a terminal and a VPS config, while the other runs on your desktop with a GUI, and that gap matters enormously if you're not a developer or if you're deploying across a team. Across the 3 subtests here, I found a genuine split. OpenClaw scores a 9 out of 10 on deployment flexibility because it runs anywhere: local, VPS, Docker, Node, MIT licensed with no lock-in, and Claude Cowork scores a 9 out of 10 on ease of use because the GUI removes the terminal barrier entirely, and on autonomous operation they're basically even since both run unattended. Cowork with the laptop closed. This one really depends on who you are. A developer comfortable in a terminal gets way more value from OpenClaw's MIT license and self-hosted control, while a knowledge worker or non-technical team member gets way more value from Claude Cowork's polished GUI, and neither tool is objectively better here, because they're just built for different people, which is the most honest way I can put it. Deployment and modality is a tie because both tools do the job, just for completely different users, so the final score is OpenClaw 1, Claude Cowork 2, 2 tied. Alright, so here's where OpenClaw clearly wins. Cost, because the software is free, MIT licensed, $0 to self-host. Deployment flexibility, because you run it on your own hardware, a VPS, or any Docker setup you want. And no lock-in at all because you own the whole stack. So if you're a developer who wants full control over your agent infrastructure, OpenClaw is the answer. And here's where Claude Cowork clearly wins. Coding performance at 80.9% on SWE Bench verified, with Claude Code the only verified 80% plus score out there. Context with a 1M token window on Pro, which is a real differentiator for long documents and big codebases. And ease of use because the GUI removes the terminal barrier completely so non-developers can actually run an agent without touching a command line. Okay, so here's the honest verdict. I went in thinking there'd be a clearer winner, but this really is a use case call. Because if you're a developer on a budget who wants to own your infrastructure, then $0 self-hosted is the move. And if you're a knowledge worker, a non-developer, or a team that needs a polished managed agent with that 80.9% coding accuracy and a 1M context window, then Claude Cowork wins. And that's your $0 versus $20 a month decision. So if this comparison got you thinking about how these tools stack up on the coding side, specifically, I put together a full head-to-head called OpenClaw versus Claude Code, which free agent wins. And it goes way deeper on the coding side of things, so if you're still deciding between these two camps, that's probably the next video you want to watch.